On June 14th, 2023, at my daughter's birthday dinner with 23 people watching, my son-in-law stood up, pointed at me across the table, and said, "This woman has been a burden on this family since the day I married into it." I set down my fork, looked at him, looked at my daughter, and said, "I see exactly who you both are." Then I drove home, opened my filing cabinet, and started making calls. But before I tell you what happened next, you need to understand who I am. Not the woman they saw sitting at the end of that table, not the quiet grandmother in the corner, who I really am, because that's what they never bothered to find out, and that's exactly what made everything possible. My name is Mabel Jean Okafor, born Mabel Jean Crowder on February 9th, 1958, in a 3-room house in Selma, Alabama. My father, Earl Crowder, drove a delivery truck for 41 years. My mother, Lurline, took in ironing and cleaned offices at night after we went to bed. They never complained about it. Not once. You worked, that was the understanding. You worked and you saved and you built something, even if that something was small, because small and yours beats big and borrowed every single time. I married Curtis Okafor in August 1981. He was a good man, Nigerian father, Mississippi mother, the kind of man who fixed things around the house before you even knew they were broken. We had one daughter, Simone Elaine Okafor, born March 22nd, 1984, 7 pounds, 1 ounce. She had Curtis's wide forehead and my stubborn mouth. Curtis died of a heart attack on a Tuesday morning in 2001. He was 46 years old. He was standing in our kitchen drinking coffee, and then he wasn't standing anymore. Our daughter was 17. I was 43. After the funeral, after everyone went home and the casseroles stopped coming, I sat at my kitchen table and wrote down every number needed say. Sodas seeings, tweetings 24 outs $75.7. Mortgage insurance payout $75,061. I wrote it all in a yellow legal pad because my mother always said if you can't see it, you can't manage it. I went back to work the following Monday. I'd been a licensed practical nurse for 14 years by then, working at Regional One Health on Jackson Avenue. After Curtis died, I picked up every extra shift they'd give me. Weekends, holidays, overnight. I drove a 1999 Camry with a cracked dashboard, and I packed my lunch every single day. I paid off the mortgage in 4 years, not 34. Simone graduated high school in 2002. She was bright, organized, driven in the way young people are when they've watched someone they love work themselves to exhaustion, and they've decided they want something different. She got into the University of Tennessee on a partial scholarship, 60% tuition covered. I took out no loans. I worked. I saved. I wrote checks. She changed in college the way water changes when it gets cold. Slowly, then suddenly. By her junior year, she was talking differently, carrying herself differently, describing her hometown the way people describe somewhere they escaped from instead of somewhere they came from. I told myself it was growth. I told myself that was what education looked like. I didn't write down the things that bothered me in those years. I should have. She graduated in 2006 and moved to Nashville, got a job at a healthcare consulting firm, met a man named Gordon Webb at a company event in 2009. Gordon's father was a commercial real estate developer in Franklin, Tennessee. His mother had a degree from Vanderbilt and wore it the way some people wear jewelry. The first time Simone brought Gordon home to Memphis, he stood in my living room and looked at my furniture the way an inspector looks at a property. Politely, with faint concern, I'd made short ribs and cornbread and a sweet potato pie I'd been making since 1987. Gordon cut the smallest sliver of pie, took one bite, and said he was watching his sugar. They married in October 2012 at a venue in Belle Meade. The wedding cost, from what I overheard Gordon's mother telling someone on the phone, close to $70,000. I was not consulted on the planning. I received a printed invitation 6 weeks before the date. My name was spelled Mabel. I wore a burgundy dress I'd bought 3 years earlier for my friend Carolyn's retirement dinner. I drove myself, parked in the overflow lot, walked in alone. At the reception, I was seated at a table near the back with Gordon's elderly great-aunt and 2 cousins from out of town who didn't know anyone either. Simone visited the table once for approximately 4 minutes, then went back to a head table and didn't look my way again. I ate the chicken, danced by myself to one song, and drove home at 9:15. 6 months after the wedding, Simone called me on a Sunday afternoon. "Mama," she said, "Gordon and I are looking at a house. We've found the one we want, but we're short on the down payment." "How short?" 40. Quiet for a moment. "Baby, that's a lot of money, I know. But the market is moving fast. We can't wait. And Mama, the school district is everything. I'm thinking about starting a family." I sat with that for 2 days. Then I called my accountant, a man named Harold Pittman, who'd done my taxes for 16 years. "Harold," I said, "if I give my daughter $45,000, where does that leave me?" He walked me through the numbers. I had $189,000 in savings by then, set aside over 22 years, a fam-packed lunches and a mortgage I paid off early. If I gave them $45,000, I'd have $144,000 left. I called Simone back, said, "But I have one condition. I want to be on the deed." Silence. "Mama, why would you need to be on the deed? It's our house." "Because it's my money. Because I've spent tons of building that number and I want protection." "Protection from what?" "Family is family, Mama." I said, "The money is the money. My name on the deed or I keep my money." Another silence. Then, "Fine. Okay." We closed on the house to be the man 13. A 5-bedroom on Dunmore Place in Brent, Tennessee. Purchase price, Fortress, $12,000. Their down was $5,000, 6 the mortgages, what's thousand, Norgan, thousands, interest, with SunTrust mortgage, loan number, 6,000, TN. The deed listed 3 names, Gordon Allen Webb, 24.5%, Simona Lane Webb, 24%, Mabel Jean Okafor, 51%. The attorney who handled the closing, a woman named Patricia Aldridge, who pulled me aside before we signed. "Mrs. Okafor," she said quietly, "you understand the full weight of what 51% means. If there's ever a dispute, you have majority control. You can initiate a sale." "She's my daughter," I said. "I'm not planning a dispute." "No," she said, "but your daddy taught you to understand what you sign." "My mother," I corrected. She nodded. "Smart woman." I signed. They got the keys. I found out about the housewarming party from a photo Simone posted online 2 weeks later. She was standing in the foyer in a white linen dress, holding a glass of champagne. The caption's hints is where the heart is. I stared at that photo for a long time. I printed it out and put it in my yellow legal pad with the number $45,000 written next to it. For the first 2 years, things were quiet. Then Simone had a baby. My granddaughter, Iris Camille Webb, born September 7th, 2015. I found out by text message. The text said, "She's here." I drove 3 hours to the hospital in Nashville and arrived to find Gordon's parents already there, already holding her, already the family the nurses were photographing. I stood in the doorway of the room until Gordon's mother stepped aside and said, "Oh, Simone's mom is here," like I was someone's carpool. After Iris, the Sunday dinners started. I thought it was an olive branch. I drove from Memphis to Brentwood every other Sunday, 3 hours each way in that same Camry, now 12 years old with 140,000 miles on it. I always brought something: peach cobbler, black-eyed peas, macaroni and cheese made from scratch. Simone would put it in the refrigerator, and I'd find it untouched in the trash when I went to help clear up. "We're keeping it clean right now," she'd say. Whole foods. At those dinners, Gordon would introduce me to their friends and neighbours in a particular way. "This is Mabel," he'd say. "She helped us out when we were getting started. Not Simone's mother, not Iris's grandmother. She helped us out. Like I was a contractor who'd done some early work on the property." One Sunday in March 2022, Gordon's father, a broad man named Franklin Webb, leaned back in his chair at the head of their dining table and said, "Gordon, you and Simone have really built something here. Started from scratch and made something real." Gordon smiled. "We worked for it," he said. Franklin nodded. "That's the only way." I was sitting 6 seats down. I set my fork down. I'd paid the foundation that house was built on. $45,000 of overnight nursing shifts and skipped vacations, and a car I'd driven for 23 years, because I was building something, not spending something. And not one person at that table said my name. I stayed quiet. I'd been staying quiet for 10 years. Iris was the one thing at those dinners that was real. She was 7 years old and she'd come find me in the kitchen every time, this small girl with her father's eyes and her mother's hair, who would take my hand and walk me to the table and sit next to me and tell me about her week. One Sunday she climbed into my lap while I was helping clear dishes. "Gordon said, 'Iris, you're too big for that.' She said, 'No, I'm not. I love my grandma.'" I pressed my face into her hair and thought, this child is the reason I keep driving 6 hours every other Sunday. In the spring of 2023, Simone called me. "Mama," she said, "we're doing a birthday dinner for Gordon in June. He's turning 45. We'd love for you to be there. A birthday dinner." Yes. Some of his work people, a few neighbours, his parents. "You want me there?" "Of course. Your family." Something in the way she said it, the small pause before family, made my stomach tighten. But I said yes. June 14th, 2023. I drove to Brentwood, arrived at 6:30. Exactly as the neighbour thin. The nicest thing I had. The same dress I'd worn to the wedding, to the hospital when Iris was born, to every occasion where I needed to look what it was. I did my hair. I drove myself. There were 23 people at that dinner. I counted them while I found my seat at the far end of the table, between Gordon's assistant and someone's teenage son who spent the entire first course on his phone. Iris sat 4 seats up from me. She caught my eye and gave me a small wave. I smiled back. Gordon's father gave the first toast. He talked about Gordon's career, his drive, his vision. He talked about the house they'd built, the family they'd grown. He talked about how Gordon had come from good stock and made the most of his opportunities. Gordon's mother cried. Simone squeezed Gordon's hand. Nobody mentioned me. I cut my salad into smaller and smaller pieces and told myself it was fine. Then tapped his glass, waited for the table to quiet. He gave a speech about gratitude, about the people who'd made him who he was. He thanked his parents. He thanked Simone. He thanked his colleagues. He thanked his golf partner by name. He sat down. I was not mentioned. Simone looked at her plate. Then Gordon's mother leaned toward me from 2 seats over and said, in the voice people use when they're being generous, "Mabel, how are you managing these days? Still in that house in Memphis?" "Yes, ma'am." "Still there?" She nodded slowly. "It must be lonely, living alone at your age." Without Curtis. "I'm fine," I said. "I keep busy." She patted my hand. "You know, Simone worries about you. We all do. Getting up there, no family nearby." I looked at my daughter. Simone was looking somewhere past my shoulder. Gordon reached for the wine. He'd been drinking since before dinner. I'd been watching 4th glass. Maybe 5th. He looked at me down the length of the table and said, "You know what I've always respected about you, Mabel?" His voice was loud. People were listening. "You're practical. You know your place. You've always known your place." I looked at him. "I know my place," I said. He smiled. "That's what I mean. No pretension, no ego. Just a simple woman who worked a simple job and knew when to step back. He said it the way men say things they think are compliments, like they're handing you something. I kept my voice level. I was a licensed practical nurse for 30 years. I raised a daughter alone after her father died. I paid off a mortgage in 4 years. I don't know what about that sounds simple to you. A few people shifted. Gordon's smile didn't change, but his eyes did. See, he pointed at me with his wine glass. That's exactly what I'm talking about. That chip. That's what I always said to Simone. Her mother's always got that chip, that working class thing, like the world owes you recognition for doing what everyone else does. Gordon, Simone said quietly. Just being honest, he said. He set down his wine glass and stood up, and the table went quiet in the way. Tables go quiet when something is about to happen, and everyone can feel it, but no one knows how to stop it. He walked around the table, not toward me directly, around it, and then he stopped behind my chair. I didn't turn around. He leaned down and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "You want to know what you actually are, Mabel? You're a woman who gave money once 20 years ago and has spent every year since then acting like that makes you somebody. It doesn't. It makes you a lender, and this family doesn't owe you a seat at this table." Then he picked up my wine glass, which was still full because I hadn't drunk anything, and he poured it on the tablecloth in front of me, deliberately, slowly, like a punctuation mark. The table went silent. I sat there and felt the wine spread across the white linen, felt 23 pairs of eyes on me, felt my daughter's silence like a third presence in the room. I looked at the stain. I looked at Gordon. I looked at Simone. She didn't say anything. She looked at her plate. I stood up. I picked up my purse. I said, very quietly, to no one in particular, "I see this family clearly now." And I walked out. I drove 3 hours back to Memphis in the dark. I didn't cry until I was on the highway, and then I cried for about 45 minutes, which I think was the right amount of time. Then I stopped because I had work to do. I got home at 11:20 p.m. I went to the second bedroom, the one I'd turned into an office when Simone grew up and moved out. I opened the filing cabinet. The deed to their house was in a green folder, third drawer down, behind the tax returns. I put it on my desk. I put the mortgage documents next to it. I put the coppings to be joint savings accounts sixing basing wins of a one spint Iris College Fund, account T8 call to 973 at Pinnacle Bank. Next to that, $30,447. I spread everything out on the desk the way my mother used to spread out laundry before sorting it. Clear, organized. I took photos of every document with my phone and emailed them to myself and my accountant Harold and saved copies to the cloud storage my nephew had set up for me. Then I wrote a list. Asset under my name. House deed 50% ownership and current estimated market $525,000. My say share approximately $268. Balance 30 instant account $447.80. Full withdrawal rights. Car loan co-signed 2020 Gordon dollars. Truck. Current weight. Balance Susa. Total potential recovery. Just over $320,000. I stared at that number. Then I called Patricia Aldridge, my attorney. Not that night. The next morning at 8 o'clock. "Patricia," I said when she answered. "You handled the closing on a property in Brentwood back in 2013. I remember," she said. "What do you need?" "I want to exercise my majority ownership rights. I want to initiate a forced sale." She was quiet for a moment. "Mrs. Okafor, you understand what that means. They'll have to leave the property. They'll receive their percentage of the proceeds, but they can't stop you." "I know. I need them to understand that." "I'll draft the notice today," she said. "Certified mail, return receipt required." "Give me 48 hours," I said. "Take 24. The next morning I drove to Pinnacle Bank. I asked to speak with the branch manager. Her name was Carolyn Fitch, a woman about my age, professional, direct. I told her I wanted to close joint account 8841222973, transfer the entire balance to my personal savings account, and I wanted it done before noon. She asked if everything was all right. He poured my wine on the table in front of 23 people, I said. Then he told me I wasn't somebody. She processed the transfer in 40 minutes. By 11:42 a.m., 31,400 saving was in my personal savings and the joint account was closed. My phone started ringing at 2:15 cm. I didn't answer. She called 6 more times, then a text. Mama, what did you do? Another, the bank account is empty. Another, please call me. I turned the phone face down and made myself lunch. My friend Carolyn Lee came over that evening with sweet tea and a look on her face that meant she'd already heard something. She said, "Your daughter called Ruth Ann, who called me, said you did something with the bank account." I closed it, I said. It was in my name. Carolyn was quiet for a moment. "You doing all right, Mabel?" I thought about it. "I'm doing exactly what I should be doing," I said. For the first time in about 10 years, the certified letter arrived at Dunmore Place on a Tuesday morning in late June. I know because the tracking number told me it was signed for at 9:47 a.m. by Simone Lane Webb. My phone rang at 10:15. This time it was a number I didn't recognize. I answered. A man's voice. "Mrs. Okafor, this is Christopher Dean, representing Gordon and Simone Webb regarding the property at Dunmore Place in Brentwood. I understand you've filed a notice of intent to exercise majority ownership rights. That's correct. Mrs. Okafor, my clients have lived in that home for 10 years. They've made every mortgage payment. They've maintained the property. They have a child in school nearby." "Mrs. Dean," I said, "your clients have a child who is also my grandchild. That didn't stop her father from telling me in front of 23 dinner guests that I wasn't somebody. That didn't stop my daughter from sitting there while her husband poured wine in front of me and said nothing. Your clients have 90 days to purchase my 51% interest at fair market value. That's approximately $268,000. If they cannot, the property goes on the market. The deed is clear, the law is clear. 90 days, Mr. Dean." He said they'd be exploring options. I said, "Explore thoroughly." The call I didn't expect came 4 days later. From Iris, Grandma. Her voice was small, careful. She was 8 years old. She had clearly rehearsed what she was going to say. "Are you still my grandma, even if you and Mom and Dad are fighting?" I said, "Baby, I will be your grandmother on the last day of my life. That doesn't change." "But they said you're taking our house." I said, "I'm not taking anything. I'm collecting what's mine. There's a difference, even when it hurts." She was quiet. "Can I still come visit you?" "Anytime you want," I said. "You call me and I will come get you." "I love you, Grandma. I love you more than you know," I told her. After we hung up, I kept working. Some things you can feel sad about and still do. That's not cruelty, that's consequence. Gordon showed up at my house in Memphis on a Saturday in August. I'd known he was coming because Carolyn called to warn me. I unlocked the front door, left it open, made myself a cup of coffee, and sat in the chair by the window. He knocked, I said. "It's open." He came in. He looked the way men look when things stop working the way they've always worked. Thinner, less certain about where to put his hands. He stood in my living room and looked around like he was seeing it for the first time. "Maybe he was, Mabel," he said. His voice had no bourbon in it this time, just words. "Mabel, please. We can't come up with that kind of money. You know we can't." "Then you'll have to sell," I said, "and you'll receive your 49% of whatever the house brings. You're not being left with nothing. You're being left with consequences." He sat down on my couch without being invited. I didn't tell him to get up. I said, "What do you want from me, Gordon?" He said, "I want you to understand that we have nowhere to go. Iris is at school there. Simone's whole life is there. I said, Gordon, you poured a full glass of wine in front of me, in front of 23 people, and told me I wasn't somebody. And my daughter watched you do it and said nothing. I waited 30 seconds. Then I said, so I need you to explain to me what I'm supposed to do with that. He didn't answer. What would you do? I said, if someone did that to your mother. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I'd probably do what you're doing. It was the only honest thing he'd said to me in 10 years. I appreciated it even then. Even sitting across from him in that chair, I said, I'm sorry it came to this, genuinely. But I'm not changing my mind. He stood up. He said, I hope you know you're destroying your daughter's marriage. I said, I watched your wife sit silently while you humiliated her mother. If this marriage breaks, look at what broke it. He left. I washed my coffee cup. I put the yellow legal pad back in the second bedroom. Then I called Patricia Aldridge and told her to move forward. The sale sign went up September 3rd. Carolyn drove by and sent me a photo. Blue and white. Keller Williams, 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, listed at $545,000 biz. Patricia had advised pricing at market. Robert had explained the math. Sale price $545,000, remaining mortgage approximately $281,000. Closing costs roughly $21,000. Net proceeds $244,000. My 51% share, $124,440, their $49. Combined with what I'd already transferred from the joint account, I'd have approximately $187,000 in liquid savings. It's more than I'd ever had in one place. Simone called the night the sign went up. I answered this time. Her voice was not angry. It was the voice of someone who'd been crying for days and had run out of the energy for it. Mama. She said it like a question and a statement at the same time. Mama. I know, I said. She said, I'm sorry. I said, I know that too. A long silence. Then she said, I should have said something that night. I said, yes, you should have. She started crying, the quiet kind, and said, I didn't know how. I said, baby, you had 30 years of watching me handle hard things. You knew how. You just chose not to. Another long silence. Then she said, is there anything I can do? I said, not right now, but keep being Iris's mama. That child is good, Simone. Don't let this swallow her. We hung up gently like 2 people who weren't done but needed to stop for the night. The house sold in 3 weeks. A family from Ohio relocating for work. Cash offer, $545,000 exactly. Clean close. By October 15th, the deposit cleared in my account. What I did next surprised even me. I'd been thinking about it for years in the way you think about things you don't let yourself want too badly. My mother had been a good cook. I am a better one. I'd spent 40 years feeding hospital co-workers on potluck days, feeding neighbours after funerals, feeding my daughter and then her family, and then standing in their kitchen while my food went to the trash. I drove to Huntsville, Alabama in November. An old nursing school friend had moved there years earlier and had been telling me for a decade that the city was changing, growing, becoming something. She was right. I found a storefront on Holmes Avenue, downtown. Not big, 800 square feet, a small counter, a kitchen. The landlord, a man named Arthur Beaumont, who was originally from Gadsden, said the rent was $800 a month and asked, I said, what kind? My kind. She smiled. He smiled, signed the lease. I opened on February 1st of the follows table. No tagline, no subtitle, just Mabel's table in hand-painted letters on the window in dark green and gold. The colours my mother always said looked like abundance. My granddaughter flew in from Nashville for opening weekend. She was 9 years old by then, serious, watchful, a little older than she should have been from months of living in a house where adults were fighting. She helped me set out the salt and pepper shakers. She organised the napkin dispensers with the focus of a child doing important work. "Grandma," she said, surveying the room when we'd finished. "This looks like you." "That's the nicest thing anyone said to me in years," I told her. The first month was slow. Local foot traffic, a few curious people, word of mouth from Carolyn and her church friends who drove down from Memphis just to eat. By March, we had regulars. A table of retired teachers who came every Thursday. Construction workers from a project 2 blocks down who came for the lunch special. A food writer from Huntsville's local paper who wrote 4 paragraphs about the short ribs that brought in 50 new customers in 1 week. One afternoon, I was in the back making a cobbler when my nephew, who managed the social media I didn't fully understand, came to the pass-through window with his phone. "Aunt Mabel," he said, "you need to see this." It was an Instagram post from an account with 92,000 followers. A woman who documented small restaurants across the South had come in the previous Saturday without my knowing. She'd ordered the catfish and the collards and the cobbler, and she'd written, "This woman has been cooking since before most restaurants on this block existed. The food tastes like it was made for you specifically. Go, don't wait." The post had 4,000 likes and 800 comments. My nephew showed me the number of people who'd shared it. I handed the phone back to him and went back to the cobbler. "The peaches don't care how many followers you have. You still have to watch them." The letter came 6 months after the restaurant opened. I recognized the handwriting before I even opened it. I sat down in the small office I'd made in the back corner, the one with my mother's photograph on the wall and the yellow legal pad in the drawer, and I opened it. Gordon had written 6 pages. His handwriting was smaller than I expected. He said he'd been in therapy, court-ordered as part of the divorce proceedings. He said his therapist had asked him to write to someone he'd wronged. He'd filled a whole notebook before he got to this one. He said he knew what he'd been doing at that dinner. He said he'd spent 10 years feeling threatened by me in a way he'd never admitted out loud. That I was a reminder that Simone came from something he couldn't understand and hadn't had the humility to respect. He said he'd taken that discomfort and turned it into cruelty. He said he was ashamed of the word simple. He said he was ashamed of the wine. He said he knew sorry wasn't the point. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He asked me to know that he understood now what he'd refused to understand before. At the end, he said Iris asked about me every day. He said she'd made her school class do a project about small businesses and had chosen Mabel's table. He enclosed a check for $3,000. He wrote in the memo line for Iris. I read the letter twice. I sat with it. Then I endorsed the check, wrote on the back, for Iris Camille Webb Education Fund, and mailed it to the savings account I'd opened in my granddaughter's name the week after I got my proceeds from the house sale. I didn't write back to Gordon. I didn't call. But I didn't throw the letter away either. I put it in the yellow legal pad behind the photo I'd printed of Simone, holding her chain glass in the doorway of the house I'd helped her buy. The one where the caption said, "Home is where the heart is." Maybe one day I'd have something to say to him. Maybe one day Simone and I would find our way back to something that looked like what we'd had before she started measuring herself by people who didn't know what her mother had done to make her. But not today. Today I had sweet potato pies cooling on the rack and a lunch rush starting in 40 minutes and my granddaughter coming to visit on Friday. Today I had $163,000 in savings and a restaurant in my name and a storefront with green and gold letters that said exactly who I was. On the first anniversary of that dinner, June 14th, 2024, I drove to the Tennessee River at dawn. I parked, walked down to the bank, stood in the grass in my good shoes with the dew soaking through, and watched the light come up over the water. 1 year ago at a dinner party, I'd been told I wasn't somebody. I'd been told I was simple, practical in my place. I'd been told that the $45,000 I gave and the name I put on that deed and the 30 years of overnight shifts and packed lunches and a cracked dashboard and a dress I wore to every occasion because it was the best I had, that none of it made me anybody. I stood there at the river and took inventory. Restaurant, open and growing. Savings account with more in it than I'd had since I paid off the mortgage in 2005. A granddaughter who called me every other day and was already asking about visiting for the whole summer. A daughter who had started, slowly, carefully, sending me texts on Sunday mornings. Not conversations yet, just checking in, just a thread. I'd lost something that night in June, I knew that. Some version of the family I'd believed we were. Some belief I'd been carrying that love was enough to hold things together even when the people in it stopped being careful with each other. I'd lost that. I wouldn't pretend otherwise. But I'd found some things too. The woman who'd survived on $4,211.08 and 3 jobs and a legal pad full of numbers. The woman who'd always known exactly what she owned. The woman who'd sat at the end of every table for years, quiet, invisible, useful, and finally understood that the table you build yourself is the only one worth sitting at. I'm Mabel Jean Okafor. I'm 66 years old. On June 14th, 2023, my son-in-law told me I wasn't somebody, and my daughter said nothing. I stood up, walked out and took everything back, not out of anger. Out of the same certainty my mother taught me when I was 6 years old, sitting at her knee while she sorted bills on the kitchen table in Selma. You write down every penny, she said, because the day you stop counting is the day someone starts taking. I counted, and then I collected, and I never stopped being somebody.